Almost immediately, the audience's attention shifted toward Jasper's appearance. Many viewers commented in surprise that this spirit looked completely different from what they had expected. His innocent and harmless appearance confused many people, and the initial disgust they had felt began to fade noticeably. Suddenly, one viewer jumped up from his chair in horror as he recognized the location on the screen. The squad was inside Chongping Hospital. This place was infamous across the entire country. It was known as the territory controlled by the terrifying A-rank spirit called the Thousand-Armed Doctor. Meanwhile, the three members of the squad carefully moved deeper into the dark building. Jasper suddenly sensed a powerful aura ahead and warned the others that the spirit was very close. Moments later, the monstrous being finally appeared before them. Its head resembled a grotesque octopus, covered with writhing, disgusting tentacles. It was clearly an A-rank spirit, and the horrifying sight alone left many viewers breathless. Its eerie voice echoed through the empty halls and even carried through the broadcast. The creature coldly declared that humans were contaminating his hospital simply by breathing within it. One of the spectators suddenly let out a terrified scream when he realized something chilling. The place shown on the broadcast was truly Chongping Hospital, the infamous building where, 7 years earlier, every doctor and patient had been brutally killed in a single horrifying night. His loud outburst immediately caught the attention of several coworkers sitting nearby in the office. Realizing he had reacted too dramatically, the man quickly cleared his throat, put his phone down on the desk, and tried to pretend nothing had happened as he returned to his work. The girl sitting beside him noticed the tension on his face. Leaning slightly closer, she quietly asked whether he had also been watching the live broadcast from the Exterminator Bureau. The man instantly brightened, clearly relieved to find someone who understood. They exchanged a knowing glance and then lowered their voices, continuing their conversation in a cautious whisper. He admitted honestly that he never expected the government to go this far, to actually broadcast a mission live from Chongping Hospital itself. The girl nodded quickly in agreement. She added that over the years dozens of A-rank extermination squads had been sent there, yet every single one of them had been completely wiped out. What confused her even more was that this current squad had only 2 fighters, and one of them was a spirit whose reliability many people openly questioned. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Jasper leaned closer to Levi and admitted nervously that the creature in front of them had far too many wriggling tentacles, and honestly, it scared him. Yet only seconds later, a strange glint of greed appeared in his eyes. He suddenly remembered the delicious octopus they once ate, full of tender tentacles that smelled incredibly good. Levi calmly confirmed that he remembered it too. Just thinking about that meal made both of them unconsciously swallow their saliva. The girls watching the broadcast were completely stunned. They couldn't believe that the squad members were casually chatting about food at such a dangerous moment. At that exact moment, the furious voice of the evil spirit echoed loudly through the room. It roared in anger, offended that humans dared to desecrate its hospital while discussing its tentacles. Jasper looked at the monster and calmly clarified that they had only said tentacles could sometimes taste good, but unfortunately, this particular creature looked far too disgusting to eat. The evil spirit could not tolerate such humiliation. It screamed in rage and demanded to know who had the audacity to call it ugly. It arrogantly declared that its tentacles were the most perfect and magnificent ones in the entire world. Levi and Jasper, however, remained surprisingly relaxed. The moment the tentacles shot forward to attack, Levi's figure suddenly vanished from where he had been standing. The spirit froze in confusion, unable to understand what had just happened. At that very moment, Levi had already appeared silently behind it. A devastating strike followed immediately, and the monstrous doctor was sent flying across the room like a rag doll. Male viewers watching the stream shouted in excitement, while many girls couldn't help blushing at the display. One single blow had sent an A-rank spirit flying several meters away, leaving the monster howling in pain. Meanwhile, the 2 fighters themselves looked completely relaxed. Jasper casually recalled how he used to tear off octopus tentacles and fry them for Levi in the past. He commented that the creature's tentacles were far too ugly to cook with, but suggested that tearing them off for fun might still be entertaining. Levi simply nodded and agreed. A look of pure fear spread across the evil spirit's face. Its skin turned pale as it asked in a trembling voice what exactly they intended to do to it. Its desperate cries echoed throughout the hospital with every strike it received, begging them to stop and pleading pitifully for them to spare its tentacles. The viewers watching the broadcast were absolutely thrilled. It had become obvious that the terrifying Dr. Spirit had no ability to resist the fighters. People were astonished by how overwhelming the squad's power truly was. Soon Jasper sighed with disappointment when he noticed that all the tentacles had already been torn off, and there was nothing left to play with. Levi then casually suggested that they should simply burn what remained. A green flame suddenly ignited in Levi's hand, and within seconds the fire spread, engulfing the creature's entire body. Jasper watched the burning spirit for a moment and then unexpectedly yawned, clearly finding the whole scene a bit boring. Many girls watching the stream gasped softly. They whispered that Jasper didn't look like a terrifying spirit at all. If anything, he looked surprisingly beautiful. More and more viewers began realizing just how powerful this squad truly was, and it became clear that Captain Levi possessed a rare and extraordinary ability. Soon an official notification appeared on the broadcast screen. The fragments of the thousand-armed doctor had been collected and uploaded, and the spirit was officially confirmed destroyed. At headquarters, the staff closely watched the viewers' reactions. Many people had tears of joy in their eyes, though the earlier fears still lingered in their hearts. After all, the commander could not forget the earlier warnings. If the fighters were killed live on national broadcast, the despair among viewers would deepen even further. In that situation, hope itself might disappear entirely, leaving humanity crushed under overwhelming fear. And yet, the appearance of individuals with powers like Levi's might finally become the turning point humanity had desperately needed. Now Levi and Jasper carried an enormous responsibility. Regardless of what happened next, the hope they had awakened in people's hearts continued to grow rapidly. Watching them through the screen, the commander felt deeply moved. All he could do was silently pray that these fighters would survive for as long as possible. Meanwhile, Levi was already using the same technique again, this time against a newly appeared two-headed evil spirit. The familiar green flame flared brightly in his hand once more, quickly consuming yet another monster. Comments continued flooding the live broadcast, waves of excited messages pouring in from viewers. People discussed enthusiastically how the third A-rank spirit had been destroyed on live broadcast, followed soon after by the fourth, known as the snake-headed banshee. By the end of the day, the final monster listed in the city archives had also been eliminated. Outside the area, crowds of fans gathered but were held back by security guards, who prevented them from getting any closer since the place was still considered dangerous territory. Officials continued to classify the surrounding zone as extremely high risk. Even so, many fans showed no fear at all. They openly said they had come only to personally thank the fighter squad. After some time passed, Levi and Jasper finally appeared outside. The moment they stepped into view, the crowd erupted into loud cheers. Yet the two fighters themselves looked slightly confused by the reaction, clearly unsure why so many people were celebrating. Someone in the crowd suddenly remembered the brave cameraman and asked loudly how anyone could possibly be so fearless. Hearing this, Ethan looked genuinely surprised, almost as if he had just realized that he also had fans now. One viewer shouted his thanks to the squad, admitting that after watching the broadcast he was no longer afraid of spirits. More voices joined in with heartfelt gratitude. Some people even wrote online that they refused to give up on life and would continue following the fighters' missions. Ethan noticed that Levi and Jasper were still standing there somewhat awkwardly, so he quietly explained that the crowd had gathered specifically to see them. The two then waved to the crowd. Jasper happily thanked everyone for their support, while Levi simply gave a short and modest expression of gratitude. After a while, a helicopter slowly descended nearby. As the fighters prepared to leave, the crowd began saying goodbye. Ethan reminded everyone to travel home safely and promised they would meet again during the next live stream. Even as the helicopter lifted into the sky, people continued waving their arms desperately, trying to send the fighters off. One of the security guards smiled as he watched the scene and commented that it reminded him of the old stories about famous idols who used to be seen off by crowds of devoted fans. One of the bystanders sighed and remarked that life had once felt peaceful and secure. But ever since the era of spirits began, everything had changed. People now hesitated even to step outside their homes, constantly afraid of what might be waiting for them in the dark. He added bitterly that hiding inside their houses didn't guarantee survival either. That harsh truth, he admitted quietly, was what frightened him the most. One of the guards standing nearby cheerfully pointed out something remarkable. In just 2 days, every A-rank spirit in their entire city had been eliminated, a result that still felt almost unbelievable. Grinning proudly, he went on to say that the city's own extermination unit now spent most of its time simply maintaining order and controlling crowds rather than fighting monsters. Not long afterward, the location of the fighters changed once again. Their helicopter carried them to another area. There, Levi soon encountered a spirit that had possessed the body of a small child. Just as Levi prepared to destroy the spirit with flames, he first slammed the creature violently into a wall. At that exact moment, Jasper suddenly sensed another sinister presence nearby. He quickly warned the others that someone, or rather something, else was lurking close to them. A massive frog-like evil spirit suddenly appeared, startling the viewers watching the live broadcast. Many people immediately recognized it from the city archives. It was another dangerous A-rank spirit known as the Frog of City B. However, viewers were confused about how this creature had appeared within the territory of the demon doll spirit. Behind their screens, several girls began worrying out loud, wondering whether the spirits might actually be cooperating with one another. Before the creature could do anything, Levi's fist struck the frog spirit directly, knocking it unconscious and sending its body flying away. This sudden attack frightened another approaching monster, a five-eyed ghost, but it still attempted to strike, stretching its long, sharp claws toward them. Levi responded without hesitation. He kicked the creature hard, and the ghost immediately began spewing furious curses. Both spirits trembled as they watched the protagonist slowly walk toward them again. In Levi's hand, the eerie green flame flared to life once more. Viewers watching the broadcast spoke with open admiration, saying that the captain's strength was simply unbelievable. Even when several A-rank spirits gathered together, they still could not withstand the overwhelming power of the fighter squad. Suddenly, Jasper shouted in alarm again after sensing yet another presence nearby. At the same time, both fighters quickly turned toward Ethan. Hovering above his head was a terrifying spirit with a bloody mouth and rows of razor-sharp teeth. The creature threatened them coldly, saying that if Levi did not extinguish his flames immediately, it would bite off half of the cameraman's head. Meanwhile, the female viewers watching the broadcast discussed the situation in horror, asking why that terrifying voice suddenly sounded so close to the camera. Others noticed that the image on their phones was shaking violently. Everyone quickly realized what had happened. A third evil spirit had appeared and had taken the cameraman hostage. Levi calmly asked Jasper whether the creature truly meant what it said about putting out the flames. Jasper confirmed that if Levi refused, the spirit would likely devour Ethan right in front of everyone. Slowly, the green fire burning in Levi's hand began to weaken and fade. Ethan was deeply moved by what he saw. With tears filling his eyes, he begged the others not to worry about him, reminding them that he was only the cameraman. He insisted there was no reason for them to compromise with the spirits because of him, and that he had long been prepared to sacrifice himself if necessary. He even remembered the day he first joined the medium fighter squadron, when he had already accepted that such a fate might come. Watching the scene unfold, one female viewer could no longer hold back her tears. Her boyfriend sitting beside her also looked at the screen silently, unable to accept what was happening. Seeing the danger escalate, the commander immediately ordered the staff to switch the broadcast to the camera attached to Levi's left ear. When the image changed and clearly showed Ethan standing directly in front of the extremely dangerous spirit, the girl watching the stream burst into uncontrollable sobs. A married couple watching together felt a heavy knot form in their chests as they stared at the screen. The woman quietly whispered that she feared the cameraman might not survive this encounter. At headquarters, an observer struggled to hold back her tears as she reported to the commander that yet another spirit, a C-rank dwarf spirit, was also lurking above them. Hearing this report, The commander was completely shocked. It quickly became clear that yet another enemy had appeared. The fourth A-rank spirit known as Lizard was hiding upside down behind Levi and Jasper. A startled Jasper hurriedly warned Levi that another ghost was directly behind them. But the danger didn't stop there. Behind a nearby pillar, yet another monster lurked, the fifth spirit, an A-rank mummy. Looking around nervously, Jasper realized the horrifying truth. 5 spirits had surrounded Levi all at once. The live chat exploded instantly with messages. Viewers cursed the spirits for their vile tactics while continuing to pray for the safety of the extermination squad. Recognizing how dangerous the situation had become, the commander immediately ordered contact with the Fighter Bureau of City B and demanded urgent reinforcements. Soon, soldiers began mobilizing toward the scene, understanding that they must assist the middle squad in destroying the A-rank spirits. However, the commander of City B made something very clear. Their mission was not simply support. It was to protect the hope of all humanity. Looking at the determined faces of the assembled fighters, she gave a strict order that under no circumstances were Levi and his team to be allowed to die. Meanwhile, the big-headed evil spirit noticed that these humans truly had the ability to extinguish the terrifying green flames. It laughed mockingly, sneering that humans were foolish creatures, always blinded by attachment and emotion. Then the monster sank its teeth deeper into Ethan's head, threatening to bite off half of it and splash Levi with the cameraman's blood. Blood began to trickle down Ethan's scalp. Despite his fear, the young man shouted loudly, begging the captain not to worry about him. Levi, however, attempted to negotiate calmly. He stated that he had already extinguished the flames and had not moved. Therefore, the spirit had no right to harm anyone. Then Levi raised his eyes toward Jasper and told him quietly to move away, explaining that if Jasper stayed there, Levi wouldn't be able to protect him. Hearing this exchange, the big-headed spirit mocked them again, sneering that this traitorous spirit companion was too weak to even matter. Deep down, the creature hoped that if Levi were killed, the remaining humans would become easy prey under the spirit's control. Soon afterward, Jasper's soul suddenly shot upward into the sky. Levi remained standing calmly in the center of the surrounding spirits and asked whether they would release Ethan if he stayed still and refrained from using his blue flames. The moment he finished speaking, the big-headed spirit burst into wild laughter and ordered the others to attack. The hungry ghosts immediately lunged toward Levi from all directions. At that desperate moment, Ethan stretched out his hand and cried out loudly, begging the captain not to sacrifice himself. Back in the office, 2 young men watching the broadcast shouted in disbelief, unable to accept that Levi was truly standing there without moving. Meanwhile, aboard a plane racing toward City B to provide reinforcements, every fighter sat silently with their eyes fixed on their phone screens, watching the tense battle unfold. One of them suddenly stopped in his tracks, his whole body going stiff as his eyes widened in shock. The moment he realized what was unfolding before him, it felt as if time itself had frozen. His breath caught in his throat, and for a brief second he could do nothing but stare, completely stunned by the terrifying scene developing right in front of him. At that very instant, the system abruptly activated with a sharp notification, announcing that a protective protocol had been triggered. The message echoed through the surroundings, catching everyone off guard. The spirits exchanged confused glances, clearly unable to understand what had just happened or why such a mechanism had suddenly come into play. Levi narrowed his eyes and carefully observed the spirit standing before him. He remembered clearly that the rule only forbade him from using green fire. No one had ever said anything about other kinds of flames. That small detail sparked an idea in his mind, and a quiet confidence began to spread across his face. In the next heartbeat, dark tongues of flames suddenly burst to life around him, swirling and twisting like living shadows. The eerie black fire flickered with a sinister glow as it spread outward. The spirits let out piercing screams as the flames touched them, the unnatural fire devouring their bodies as if they were nothing more than dry leaves. The hero's overwhelming power exploded outward like a violent storm. In a single devastating surge, every opponent in the area was wiped out instantly. There was no struggle, no resistance, not even a trace of ash left behind to prove they had ever existed. The last remaining spirit felt that terrifying power wash over him like a crushing wave. His entire body trembled uncontrollably as panic took hold of his mind. The fear was so intense that even breathing became difficult, and a cold dread crept into his heart. Slowly, the writhing tongues of black flames stretched toward him, moving like predatory creatures ready to strike. Their dark glow reflected clearly in his wide, frightened eyes, making the flames look even more ominous and inescapable. His voice trembled as he stuttered, desperately asking what kind of fire that terrifying power was. But he never received an answer. In the very next moment, the black flames surged forward and swallowed him completely, leaving no chance for escape. Just as the dark flames were about to brush against Ethan, the operator watching the scene suddenly felt a familiar sensation. In an instant, he recognized the terrifying energy of that flame. His eyes widened as he realized that the fire burning before him was none other than the infamous dark flame. Suddenly, right through the swirling mass of black fire, a hand pushed forward without hesitation. It reached into the devouring flames and firmly grabbed Ethan, pulling him away from the burning spirits before the deadly fire could touch him. Even through the chaos and danger surrounding him, the young man never let go of the camera he was holding. His hands remained steady the entire time, determined to capture everything that was happening despite the terrifying situation. It turned out that the one who had pulled him to safety was Jasper. Ethan looked up at the spirit with deep gratitude shining in his eyes, clearly realizing that he had been saved at the last possible moment. It was the very first time in his life that he had ever been lifted into the air by a ghost. Surprisingly, instead of feeling fear or anxiety, a strange sense of comfort filled his heart. To his own surprise, the experience left him feeling oddly happy. Meanwhile, the married couple who were watching the live broadcast from their home stared at the screen in amazement. They were pleasantly stunned by everything they had just witnessed, hardly believing their eyes. The three students watching the broadcast burst into excited cheers. They couldn't stop talking about how incredibly powerful Captain Levi was. At the same time, they admired how Jasper had managed to rescue the cameraman at the very last second. The young man wearing glasses pushed them up the bridge of his nose and shouted with excitement. In his opinion, the main character's strength was simply unbelievable, far beyond anything he had imagined. At that moment, the commander quietly admitted to himself that the human fighter squad was far more formidable than he had originally expected. Their abilities had clearly surpassed his earlier predictions. Soon afterward, the system delivered another notification. It calmly reported that the wearer had successfully activated a 4th-rank divine fire control ability, marking a major advancement in power. Because of this upgrade, a completely new skill was unlocked. It was called the geocentric fire cage, a powerful advanced technique capable of serving both offensive and defensive purposes at the same time. The geocentric fire cage worked in a unique way. Allies could stand safely inside the burning structure while the raging flames surrounded the outside. The fire would fiercely attack enemies outside, while leaving those within completely unharmed. Within only 1 month, the squad carried out relentless operations across the region. During that short time, they managed to eliminate 63 third-rank spirits across 10 different cities. Just 2 months later, their achievements became even more astonishing. The human squad had successfully wiped out every single A-rank spirit across the entire territory of China. The story then shifts to a completely different location. A messenger was sprinting forward with all the strength he had left, desperately fleeing from evil spirits. Behind him, Theo chased closely, trying to keep up with his exhausted companion. Without warning, the messenger suddenly stopped in panic. Seeing this, his companion immediately asked what had happened, his voice filled with concern and urgency. The reason soon became clear. Across the street, on the side of a tall building, a massive screen was displaying a live news broadcast. On it, the figures of Levi and Jasper appeared clearly. According to the news report, the two of them had accomplished an incredible feat in just 3 months. They had completely exterminated every registered A-rank spirit. Images of the hero and his partner filled the screen. Theo stared at the display in shock, while the herald beside him quickly confirmed that the two figures shown there were indeed the same people they knew. The herald slowly nodded, still unable to believe what he was seeing. Then he cursed under his breath, realizing with frustration that Levi and Jasper had gone to a neighboring country. That explained everything. It was the reason they had searched everywhere, yet still failed to find them. The news continued, explaining that the squad's fame was spreading rapidly across the world. In recognition of their power, the government had officially classified them as possessing S-rank combat strength. As they kept running, the messenger and Theo listened carefully to the report. They exchanged a quick look with each other, silently coming to the same decision. They would head to that city. However, the demon suddenly stopped again and turned around. With a serious expression, he pointed out that before anything else, they first needed to deal with the creatures that were still chasing them. Without wasting another moment, Theo swung his staff fiercely at the approaching evil spirit. The powerful strike landed instantly, and the creature shattered apart like smoke in the wind. But the danger was not over yet. Another enemy suddenly leaped out from behind them, catching them off guard. The creature rushed forward, preparing to attack Theo. Before it could strike, however, the herald released a chilling breath that instantly froze the spirit's leg in place. The confused spirit turned around, trying to understand what had stopped him. At that exact moment, Theo's staff came crashing down, delivering a crushing blow that shattered the creature's body completely. After the battle ended, the herald let out a long breath of relief. Theo tossed aside the bamboo staff and glanced at it with tired eyes, realizing that the weapon had finally become useless. The messenger was still breathing heavily from exhaustion, but he noticed something interesting. Despite everything that had happened, his partner's spiritual energy still seemed surprisingly intact. However, Theo quickly silenced him with a whisper. He warned him not to talk about it anymore, worried that someone might overhear them and try to steal the little strength he had left. Soon after, fatigue began to overwhelm them. Finally, the exhausted messenger collapsed onto the ground with an irritated groan. Frustrated, he complained that he had no idea how they were supposed to make it all the way to China. Theo quietly sat down beside him, deep in thought. Meanwhile, his companion was already drifting off to sleep, too tired to keep his eyes open any longer. At the same time, the news broadcast continued playing somewhere in the city. For a brief moment, the screen displayed a distant shot of Theo's back and the herald's tail. Across various regions, fighter squads were beginning to arrive at areas where strong spiritual fluctuations had been detected. Ironically, the usual anomalies in those places had already been completely cleared. Meanwhile, at the airport, nearly everyone's attention was focused on a single man. People whispered quietly among themselves, saying that he looked so handsome he could easily pass as a celebrity. That man turned out to be Theo, dressed neatly and elegantly. In his arms, he carried the messenger, and the unusual sight quickly drew curious and admiring looks from the people passing by. As Theo walked through the airport, girls couldn't help but glance at him with admiration, while many guys looked at him with envy. His tall figure and long flowing hair made him stand out wherever he went. Soon afterward, he calmly approached the check-in counter and asked the staff to issue him a ticket for the next flight. However, the airport employee looked at him with confusion and politely explained that he could not bring the bird onto the plane. Hearing this, Theo lifted the messenger slightly and explained that the bird was actually his relative. The employee hesitated but still replied that even so, pets were not allowed inside the passenger cabin. She further explained that animals had to be checked in as cargo. To avoid delaying the flight, she suggested that the bird be transferred to the baggage compartment. When the messenger heard this suggestion, he immediately turned to Theo with panic in his eyes. He was terrified that they might be separated and that ghosts might find him while he was trapped alone in the luggage area. The moment people realized that the rooster was speaking human language, their faces instantly turned pale. The girls who had been admiring Theo only seconds earlier now stepped back in shock. Panic spread quickly through the airport. People began running away in fear, and in just seconds the crowd completely cleared, leaving Theo and his strange companion standing alone. Taking advantage of the sudden chaos, Theo quietly activated his ability and teleported away. In the next instant, he was already walking calmly down a distant road as if nothing unusual had happened. The few people nearby only saw a blur past them like a gust of wind. None of them could clearly understand what had just moved past them so quickly. Later, after hiding inside a restroom to catch their breath, Theo spoke seriously. If they were required to travel separately, then taking an airplane would clearly be too dangerous. After thinking about it carefully for a moment, he sighed and made a decision. With a gloomy look on his face, he admitted that they had no other option left. Before long, the two of them found themselves standing quietly on the seashore, staring out at the vast ocean stretching endlessly before them. Theo then admitted honestly that although most of his strength had already been drained, he still had enough energy left to protect himself. If necessary, he believed he could attempt to swim across the sea. Without hesitating any longer, he quickly threw off his clothes and stepped forward. A moment later, he leaped into the cold water, beginning the daring journey across the sea. The messenger clung tightly to Theo's shoulders, gripping him with both hands as if his life depended on it. His entire focus was fixed on one simple goal: holding on and not slipping off. With the wind rushing past them and the waves roaring below, he concentrated with all his strength just to keep his balance. However, when they had reached roughly halfway across the water, everything suddenly changed. Theo abruptly turned around and began swimming back toward the shore even faster than before. Between breaths, he complained that the sea was crawling with strange creatures, and judging by their aura, many of them were frighteningly powerful. After finally dragging themselves back onto dry land, both of them collapsed onto the sand, breathing heavily and desperately gulping down air. Behind them, the surface of the sea rippled as several sea spirits slowly emerged from the water, staring at them with greedy, hungry eyes. Without warning, a powerful shock wave suddenly burst across the surface of the water, cutting through the air like an invisible hammer and crashing directly toward the lurking spirits. The sudden force frightened the sea spirits badly. In a flash, they panicked and quickly disappeared beneath the waves, diving deep underwater to avoid whatever terrifying power had just struck. Theo slowly raised his hand and stared thoughtfully toward the sea. After a brief moment of silence, he realized there was really only one possible solution left for them now. The messenger lay across his thigh and looked up at him with curious eyes, wondering what he planned to do next. Soon after, the demon spread out a pair of massive dark blue wings. In the blink of an eye, Theo transformed into a giant bird and carefully picked the messenger up. He noted with quiet satisfaction that as divine beasts, flying was their greatest advantage. No matter how dangerous the ghosts were below, they simply could not chase them once they took to the sky. With a powerful beat of his wings, Theo launched them high into the air. They soared above the clouds and continued flying steadily toward their destination, facing no obstacles along the open sky. Several hours passed in the endless sky. Eventually, the messenger spoke with a slightly embarrassed tone, admitting that he was starting to feel something rather strange. It felt as if the space on Theo's back was gradually shrinking. The place where he sat seemed tighter than before, almost like something invisible was pressing against them. Theo thought about this carefully and suggested a possible explanation. Perhaps this world simply could not tolerate spiritual creatures of such massive size, and the environment itself was slowly forcing him to shrink. As soon as the rooster understood this possibility, panic immediately flashed across his face. The realization made his heart race with sudden fear. The messenger hugged Theo tightly and urged him anxiously to fly faster. His voice carried clear urgency, as if every second in the air had suddenly become precious. Theo flapped his wings with all the strength he had left. Soon the messenger himself spread his wings and began flying beside him, both of them pushing their bodies to the absolute limit, their feathers nearly tearing loose from the strain. After several exhausting hours of desperate flying, a faint outline finally appeared on the horizon. The sight of land made Theo burst out with joy as he happily announced that they had finally reached the shore. But the messenger was already gasping for breath, his strength completely drained. He struggled desperately just to remain in the air for a few more seconds. Soon his vision blurred and darkness crept in. His body went limp as he lost consciousness, and he began falling helplessly toward the sea below. Seeing this happen, Theo immediately panicked and dove downward at full speed, chasing after the falling messenger. At the same time, the surface of the sea below stirred violently. A group of terrifying monsters had already gathered there, clearly waiting for something to fall into their reach. One enormous water monster had already opened its massive jaws, ready to devour the helpless prey. But at the very last moment, Theo swooped down and snatched the herald away from the jaws of death. The sea monsters stared upward with furious eyes as the two figures escaped into the air. Despite their anger, they could do absolutely nothing to reach them. Although the messenger had been rescued just in time, his condition still looked very serious. He remained unconscious and showed no sign of waking up. Theo looked at him in growing panic. When there was still no response, he began transferring his own life force to the messenger, gently blowing spiritual energy toward him in desperate hope of reviving him. After a tense moment, the messenger's eyes slowly fluttered open. Though he had regained consciousness, his face still looked extremely pale and weak. Seeing him awake again filled Theo with overwhelming relief. With a joyful voice, he excitedly announced that they had finally arrived in China. Those words immediately made the herald sit upright in shock. His tired eyes suddenly lit up with excitement and disbelief. Once he realized that they had truly made it, he jumped up happily and wrapped his arms tightly around Theo. Over and over again, he excitedly repeated that they had finally succeeded. Theo stood there stunned and speechless for a moment. But soon he returned the embrace, holding him tightly as waves of emotion washed over both of them. Meanwhile, on a busy street nearby, people hurried along in a constant stream, all focused on their daily routines without noticing the extraordinary journey that had just taken place. At that moment, Theo carried the messenger in his arms and walked up to a small street stall. Politely, he asked the vendor how they could get to a place called City Z. The shop owner's face instantly turned pale when he heard the name. With clear fear in his voice, he warned that City Z was known as a deadly zone that people avoided at all costs. Seeing the man's terrified reaction, Theo turned toward a passerby and asked in confusion why everyone believed that place was so dangerous. He calmly pointed out that even if it truly was a deadly zone, the ghost extermination squads would still be sent there. That meant they could simply follow the same route. A nearby young man suddenly became excited when he overheard their conversation. He approached Theo and announced that he was also heading to City Z to support the fighter squad. Before Theo could even reply, the enthusiastic young man grabbed both him and the messenger and cheerfully invited them to join his group of travelers. Soon afterward, a bright blue car was speeding along the highway. The three of them sat side by side inside, racing straight toward their destination. As the car continued forward, Theo suddenly felt a strange and unsettling presence creeping up behind them. Both he and the messenger turned around at the same time. Behind them sat two cheerful girls who were smiling, waving, and encouraging them with friendly enthusiasm. The young man beside them also joined in, reassuring everyone that even though the journey was dangerous, there was no reason to be afraid because none of them were facing it alone. Meanwhile, hidden in the grass beside the road, several spirits slowly stirred. They had caught a strange scent drifting through the air, one that seemed incredibly tempting to them. Almost immediately, both the herald and Theo realized what was happening. Their senses picked up the disturbing truth. A group of spirits had begun following their vehicle. Theo quietly added that he still had one more ability left to use. The man sitting next to him began trembling in fear, whispering in confusion that it sounded as if the rooster had just spoken. By that moment, several spirits had already crawled across the body of the car, pressing themselves against the windows and peering inside with eerie curiosity. Suddenly, Theo's calm voice broke the tension as he activated his battle seal. In the next instant, a wave of chilling magic burst outward and wrapped itself around the surrounding spirits like an icy storm. The creatures froze completely in place. Moments later, their bodies cracked apart and slowly faded into nothingness. Inside the car, the passengers suddenly felt a sharp drop in temperature. They exchanged puzzled looks, unsure why the air had suddenly turned so cold. Before long, the car finally came to a stop, and everyone began stepping outside one by one. They had all come to this place with the same purpose: to support the ghost extermination squad and show that the entire country stood behind them. Elsewhere, deep within the lair of an S-rank devil beast, an eerie silence filled the dark cavern. Suddenly, the creature sensed the presence of humans approaching. Its scarlet eyes slowly opened, glowing with hunger as it greedily noted that another source of delicious energy had appeared. Meanwhile, Theo continued carrying the messenger carefully in his arms as they moved through the crowd. All of a sudden, the sky above began to darken unnaturally. A heavy sense of unease spread among the people nearby. Without warning, a red shadow streaked through the air like lightning. In a single terrifying moment, it struck the man beside them, piercing straight through him. The girl nearby staggered and collapsed to the ground. The messenger stared at the wounded woman in shock. In that instant, he clearly sensed powerful waves of sinister energy pulsing from the attack. Fear spread rapidly among the surrounding people, and panic began to rise as everyone realized something dangerous had appeared. Reacting quickly, Theo rushed forward and pressed his hand over the wound, stopping the bleeding as spiritual power began slowly healing the injury. He calmly explained that he had protected the woman's heart with spiritual breath. Because of that, there was still a chance to save her life. Then he firmly ordered the others to act immediately, put her into the car, and leave this place at once before the unseen enemy struck again. Deep inside, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of worry. The enemy's movements were unbelievably fast, far quicker than anything they had encountered before. On top of that, the overwhelming aura surrounding the creature made it clear that its strength far surpassed the spirits they had fought until now. Suddenly, a strange monster appeared hovering in the air. Its massive figure cast a shadow over the ground, and when it spoke, its deep voice boomed like thunder rolling through the sky. With a cold and calculating tone, the creature declared that the chicken standing there posed a serious threat to him. Its eyes narrowed as it carefully observed the small but unusual bird. The devilish creature then slowly turned its gaze toward Theo. With an arrogant expression, it ordered him to hand over the beast immediately, as if the demand itself was not something that could be refused. Theo met the creature's terrifying gaze without the slightest hint of fear. His eyes remained calm and steady, showing that he had no intention of backing down. At that moment, the loud rumble of approaching engines echoed nearby. Hearing the sound, the surrounding people quickly rushed toward their cars, desperate to escape the dangerous situation. Most of them still didn't fully understand what had just happened. Even so, their instincts told them that staying here would only lead to trouble, so they chose to leave as quickly as possible. However, Theo remained standing outside, refusing to retreat. Instead, he stayed behind calmly, covering the others' escape and making sure they had time to get away safely. Inside one of the cars, several kids anxiously shouted at him through the window. They tried desperately to persuade him to leave with them, insisting that the extermination squad should handle the fight. In response, the messenger snapped impatiently and ordered them to stop arguing. He told them to ignore the situation entirely and drive away immediately. The moment he spoke, the people around were once again stunned. Hearing clear human words coming from the rooster forced them to finally accept the unbelievable truth that the bird could actually talk. Meanwhile, the monster did not stop for even a second. It continued launching furious attacks, its movements filled with rage and destructive power. Yet Theo handled the situation with surprising ease. He smoothly dodged the incoming strikes and immediately counterattacked, keeping the monster constantly on the defensive. The creature snorted arrogantly and declared that it wasn't even interested in fighting him. It said it only wanted the spirit and once again demanded that Theo hand over the chicken. Hearing this, Theo frowned slightly and responded with open contempt. He dismissed the creature as nothing more than a minor spirit that was far less impressive than it believed. But despite his calm words, anger burned quietly inside him. He knew very well that without his special abilities, they would have been killed by this enemy long ago. At that moment, the beast suddenly shifted its position, preparing to strike the demons from behind with a sneaky and unexpected attack. However, Theo sensed the danger just in time. With quick reflexes, he raised his leg and easily blocked the incoming strike before it could land. The monster's frustration finally exploded. Like a creature losing its mind, it screamed wildly, demanding that Theo die immediately. Then, without hesitation, it unleashed 6 powerful attacks at once, sending them rushing toward the demons from multiple directions. Meanwhile, the people inside the vehicle kept shouting desperately for Theo and the messenger to come with them. They argued that staying behind would only make things worse and put everyone in danger. But Theo ignored their calls completely. His attention remained fixed on the monster as he continued fighting without hesitation. The attacks came one after another like a relentless storm. Theo carefully observed every movement of his opponent, responding with lightning-fast strikes that cut straight through the enemy's defenses. Suddenly, however, the creature changed its target and attempted to attack the herald instead. Sensing the sudden danger, Theo reacted instantly. Without a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward and shielded the herald with his own body, taking the full force of the blow. The impact damaged his body badly. A wave of unbearable pain spread through him, and his balance faltered as the injury took its toll. But the monster showed no mercy. Seeing its advantage, it continued pressing forward and launched attack after attack against the weakened demons. Even with the last of his strength, Theo still managed to lift his foot and block another incoming strike. Unfortunately, the devil finally managed to break through his defense. The attack tore into Theo's wing, leaving a deep and serious wound. Realizing how dangerous the situation had become, Theo urgently ordered the rooster to escape at once. He promised that he would hold the enemy back as long as he could. The herald reluctantly obeyed the command. However, he grumbled bitterly, complaining that he had summoned this foolish protector only to ensure his own safety. Despite those sarcastic words, deep inside he was genuinely worried about Theo's fate. Meanwhile, Theo continued fighting bravely. Yet the enemy's attacks only grew more violent and relentless with every passing second. Then the creature suddenly changed direction again. In that instant, Theo realized with alarm that the enemy was now targeting his brother-in-law. At the same time, the herald tried to fly away, convincing himself that he could not allow Theo to die in his place. His emotions overwhelmed him so strongly that it almost felt like he was saying farewell to the world. Just at that critical moment, two familiar figures appeared. Jasper and Levi arrived in time, and the protagonist immediately stepped in to rescue both of them. The messenger's eyes widened in disbelief, and a tear quietly slipped down his cheek as he realized what had just happened. Jasper quickly recognized the familiar figure thanks to the distinctive color of his feathers. After confirming that he was not mistaken, Jasper happily waved his hand and mentally called out to the chicken with excitement. Meanwhile, Levi, the squad's main fighter, continued attacking fiercely, unleashing a violent strike of blazing flame toward the sinister creature. The evil spirit recoiled in shock at the intense heat and hurriedly dodged. Realizing that the rumors about this flame were true, he angrily cursed the squad, noting that humans had suddenly become much stronger. However, instead of fear, this newfound power only sparked greater interest within him. After all, as an S-rank spirit, he saw himself as the ultimate predator. To him, every explosion and every human hunt had always been nothing more than an entertaining game. Crushing humans felt no different from stepping on tiny ants beneath his feet. He had always been used to controlling everything around him, and he simply refused to believe that humans could ever become real threats. In the monster's mind, there was absolutely no one capable of resisting his overwhelming power. At that moment, Levi's expression darkened. With a cold voice, he stated clearly that he knew this creature was responsible for the deaths of countless innocent people. In response, the monster burst into loud laughter. He casually referred to his victims as part of his personal collection and mocked Levi, claiming that his bones would soon become another addition. But Levi moved faster than lightning. He instantly realized that the monster before him was exactly the one the commander had warned about, and he decided to eliminate it right there. Without hesitation, he launched an attack using the very flame the devil feared the most. For the first time, the evil spirit felt the crushing pressure of the green flame. A flash of genuine surprise appeared in his eyes. He roared in pain as the fire began eating away at his body, slowly burning through flesh and exposing the sharp bones beneath. Even so, he bent forward but refused to collapse. Realizing that he was still alive, he looked stunned that the flames had not completely destroyed him. Soon he began laughing again, concluding arrogantly that the green flames were incapable of killing him. He mockingly wondered if Levi had any other tricks left. The answer came instantly, a violent strike of black fire. This was the legendary flame spoken of in rumors, and for the first time, true fear appeared in the monster's eyes. Just one strike was enough. The monster's bones shattered instantly, crumbling apart like a fragile porcelain vase. Levi frowned slightly, quietly noting that the enemy's resilience was impressive and that even these flames might not completely finish him yet. Meanwhile, Jasper nearly began dancing with excitement nearby, openly admiring the incredible power and dominance displayed by the squad's main hero. Ethan stared in pure amazement as Captain Levi unleashed a single devastating burst of black fire. In the blink of an eye, the terrifying S-rank devil that had moments ago dominated the battlefield was completely destroyed. The sheer power of the attack left Ethan speechless, his camera trembling slightly as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. One of the viewers watching the live broadcast couldn't contain his excitement. With clear delight in his voice, he pointed out that even monsters of such a terrifying rank were unable to stand against the captain's overwhelming strength. The broadcast signal began to flicker and distort slightly from the intensity of the battle. At the same time, the chat feed exploded with thousands of messages as viewers rushed to celebrate Levi's incredible achievement of defeating an S-rank spirit. Nearby, a group of high school girls watched the scene unfold with shining eyes. They began to sincerely admire the squad, wondering out loud if these warriors might actually be capable of wiping out every S-rank spirit that still existed in the world. One of the girls spoke with hopeful excitement, suggesting that if such a thing were truly possible, then the remaining A-rank ghosts would eventually disappear as well. If that happened, it would mean something humanity had almost forgotten how to imagine. It would mean that the endless apocalypse could finally come to an end. For the first time in years, the people watching seemed to feel a spark of genuine hope. It was the kind of hope that suggested the long era of fear and darkness might finally be coming to a close. One girl quietly wiped her eyes as she remembered her parents. Deep in her heart, she realized that perhaps they had finally lived long enough to see the arrival of those who could truly save the world. Another young man felt a quiet but powerful joy growing inside him. For the first time, he believed that these fighters might really be able to end the nightmare that had haunted humanity for more than 50 years. In another home across the city, a mother and her small child sat together on the sofa, watching the same news broadcast on their television. The little girl looked up innocently and asked whether this meant she no longer had to be afraid anymore. Hearing those words, the mother suddenly felt tears welling up in her eyes. Elsewhere, a high school girl sat alone on the side of a quiet street, silently crying while watching the news on her phone. In her thoughts, she spoke to her parents who were no longer alive, realizing that at last, a real glimmer of hope had appeared. Tears of happiness rolled gently down her cheeks as she looked at a warm photograph of the three of them together, wishing with all her heart that they were still alive to see this moment. Meanwhile, the messenger let out a long yawn while the others nearby chatted happily about the victory. With a slightly annoyed tone, he complained that their return was taking far too long and no one knew how much longer they would have to wait. At the same time, Ethan and several other operators cheerfully turned their cameras toward the rooster, curious about the strange creature that had been traveling with the squad. Suddenly, the messenger felt a sharp sense of alarm. He realized that he had forgotten something important. At that exact moment, the camera operators froze in fear as they noticed something shocking. The rooster had just spoken. However, the messenger himself wasn't even paying attention to their reactions. His mind was completely focused on the uncomfortable feeling that he had overlooked something critical. Meanwhile, Theo looked extremely exhausted. His posture sagged slightly, and he appeared as though he was on the verge of collapsing at any moment. Turning toward Phoenix with worry in his eyes, he quietly wondered if the person who had summoned him still had not called him back, because they might have already died. Just then, a subordinate suddenly rushed into the room with urgent news. He reported that several people were requesting permission to use the spiritual spring located in the eastern part of the forest. However, the moment he noticed the exhausted state of his master, his expression changed completely. Shock filled his face, and he struggled to hide his horror. Theo glanced at him gloomily and asked in a low voice whether he really looked that terrible. As he spoke, feathers began slowly falling from his body. With a bitter expression, he wondered why he still hadn't been summoned back yet. The subordinate watched in growing panic as more and more feathers continued drifting down to the ground. At that moment, the phoenix silently came to a troubling conclusion. Something had gone terribly wrong with the situation. The queen had already died, and now the king seemed to be slowly dying as well. Meanwhile, in the abandoned city of P in Russia, Jasper and the messenger followed closely behind Levi. Levi calmly asked Jasper whether there was a ghost hiding inside the nearby building. Jasper focused briefly and then confirmed that he could indeed sense one. Suddenly, a massive rock came crashing down toward them at terrifying speed. The herald's eyes widened as he realized instantly that the ghost had already arrived. Without hesitation, Levi stepped forward and placed himself in front of everyone, shielding the group with his body. At that exact moment, the spirit finally revealed itself and launched its attack. It was none other than the infamous S-rank devil known as Mashutka. Even so, Levi's expression remained as calm as ever, as if the sudden appearance of such a powerful enemy did not disturb him in the slightest. In the next instant, Levi delivered a swift kick that sent the devil flying backward through the air. Mashutka stared in disbelief, unable to accept that this human fighter might actually be stronger than himself. Before he could react, Levi had already appeared behind him with incredible speed. Continuing his assault, Levi struck again in midair, catching the spirit completely off guard. With one crushing blow, he drove Mashutka straight into the ground. Nearby, Jasper watched the entire scene with admiration, while the herald calmly evaluated the fight and concluded that this opponent was only an S-rank spirit. Far away, the Supreme Commander of Russia watched the broadcast and felt genuine astonishment. He finally understood just how extraordinary Levi's strength truly was. One young viewer watching the battle at home couldn't hold back his excitement and let out a loud cry of admiration. In another household, a couple watched Levi coldly destroy the evil spirit. Their faces were filled with both envy and admiration for such incredible power. Meanwhile, Levi himself grabbed the evil spirit by the head with one hand. With the other, he began summoning a swirling sea of flames around the creature. Within seconds, the fire spread across the devil's body, causing it to scream in agony as the flames devoured it. However, Levi watched carefully with a hint of uncertainty, hoping that Mashutka had finally been destroyed. The last time he fought a similar enemy, the flames had failed to eliminate it completely. That opponent had been stronger than this red-glowing creature. Growling angrily, the evil spirit clung to the wall and admitted that this man was truly as dangerous as the rumors claimed. Hiding behind a barrier, it secretly rejoiced that it still had a possible escape route. When Levi briefly turned away, the creature immediately tried to escape. However, the herald noticed the movement instantly. The rooster sensed the ominous energy surrounding the bear-like spirit and quickly realized that this must be the true form of an S-rank devil. Without wasting time, the messenger flew up toward the hero and urgently informed him about the situation. Soon the rooster was already chasing after the escaping spirit. The fleeing creature cursed angrily at him while trying to get away. Suddenly, Mashutka swung his claws violently and launched a sharp attack toward the messenger. The herald barely managed to dodge the strike while continuing to retreat. At the same time, he unleashed a freezing attack toward the devil. The evil spirit realized too late what was happening. One of its legs was already trapped in ice, and its face twisted with fury as it lost control and rushed forward to attack. Seeing the sharp claws rushing toward him, the herald panicked. In that terrifying moment, he realized that his life was hanging by a thread. Desperate, he mentally called out to Theo, begging for help. Almost instantly, Levi appeared right in front of him and shielded him from the attack. With a single powerful strike, Levi shattered the devil's attack and forced the enemy back. Only then did the messenger finally feel safe again and regain his composure. Even so, he continued calling out anxiously for his son-in-law. All of this happened right before Jasper's eyes. Watching the scene unfold, he became extremely curious about who exactly the rooster was calling so desperately. Meanwhile, the devil bear tried to flee in panic, hoping to escape from the terrifying human. However, Levi teleported instantly and appeared directly in front of the fleeing creature. Looking down at it with cold indifference, he calmly remarked that the monster actually looked rather cute. Levi's calm and almost playful remark completely stunned the evil spirit. The creature froze for a moment, unable to understand how someone facing an S-rank monster could speak with such casual indifference. Without showing the slightest hesitation, Levi suddenly grabbed the spirit by the neck and lifted it into the air. The monster immediately panicked, struggling violently while shouting that it was an S-rank spirit and should not be treated so lightly. As if the creature weighed nothing at all, the protagonist casually walked over to Jasper while holding the struggling monster. Handing it over like a gift, he asked with a curious smile whether Jasper thought the little bear looked cute. Watching this absurd scene unfold, the messenger's face turned pale. A terrible feeling formed in his chest, and he suddenly had a very bad premonition about what was about to happen next. Levi and Jasper both stared at the creature with strangely interested expressions. They began discussing it as if they were examining an animal at a market, wondering whether such a cute little bear might taste good if it were roasted. Seeing this familiar situation, the messenger sighed inwardly. Deep down, he already knew exactly how the story would end, because he had seen this type of situation play out many times before. Levi then casually suggested that Jasper should try cooking the bear and see how it tasted. Jasper immediately agreed with bright enthusiasm, clearly excited by the unusual opportunity. Soon flames surrounded the bear's body. The spirit snarled angrily and ground its teeth together, completely convinced that such primitive fire would never be capable of roasting a powerful S-rank spirit like him. But suddenly his confidence vanished. Blue flames burst to life around his body, sending a chilling cold deep into his bones. The sensation felt as if something inside him was slowly dissolving. Jasper observed the situation carefully, but then shook his head in disappointment. Since the meat was clearly not cooking properly, he concluded that this kind of fire was unsuitable. In response, Levi calmly summoned a powerful green flame. At this point, the devil bear seemed to completely lose hope. The creature's expression suggested that it had already accepted its tragic fate. Before it could even recover from the pain of the previous flames, the new green fire swallowed it entirely, burning fiercely across its body. The monster screamed in unbearable agony as the flames devoured it. Unable to watch such a horrifying sight, Jasper eventually turned his head away from the charred and twisting body. When the burning finally ended and only bones remained, Jasper looked at the remains with regret and commented sadly that there was not even a single piece of meat left to eat. At that moment, Levi's expression turned cold. A black flame ignited in his palm, and with a simple flick of his hand, he reduced the remaining bones to ashes instantly. The creature let out a final terrified shriek before crumbling into dust that scattered into the wind. Afterward, Levi and Jasper calmly agreed that from now on it would be much simpler to just burn spirits immediately. Meanwhile, the messenger frowned deeply as a thought suddenly returned to his mind. At last he remembered exactly what it was that he had forgotten earlier. He recalled that Theo had been seriously injured during the battle before. With growing concern, he wondered how Theo had managed to recover after returning. For a brief moment, his expression brightened at the thought of contacting him to check if he was all right. However, the thought quickly faded. He decided that Theo probably needed time to recover, especially since that injury had been suffered while protecting him. Meanwhile, Theo's subordinates watched him with horror. They noticed that their lord had already lost a frightening amount of feathers, and if things continued like this, he might soon become completely bald. At the same time, global news reports announced that the Ghost Extermination Squad had successfully eliminated the Shadow Dragon Spirit along with another S-rank creature in Country Z.